Hello, my name is Gil Penalosa, and this is Cities for Everyone, the webinar. Every other Tuesday, I invite fascinating people from around the world to share experiences and knowledge that will help us create affordable, equitable, and sustainable cities. I was born in Bogota, Colombia, where as commissioner I led the design and construction of over 200 parks and took a small program called Ciclovia, Open Streets, and increased it to over 120 kilometers, 75 miles of car-free streets every Sunday and holiday, where more than 1 million people walk, bike, run, shop, enjoying the presence of each other. 17 years ago, I created 880 Cities, a non-profit organization based in Toronto, Canada, where I live. Last year, I ran for mayor and came second with 100,000 votes. My aim was to change the conversation in creating a Toronto for everyone. I've been fortunate to have worked in over 350 cities in all continents, sharing and learning. Based on all experiences, I develop master classes and keynotes customized to each city. But Cities for Everyone, the webinar, is a way of giving back. It's always free and hopefully always interesting. Please invite others to join us every other Tuesday, anyone who cares about cities and people, equity and sustainability, about all living older, healthier, and happier. Hello, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We have people from over 30 countries. This is great. And as you remember, 2 weeks ago, we had Carlos Moreno, who did a presentation of the 15-minute city. That is a nice link with today's presentations. And the 15-minute city has the principles of the environment, solidarity, participation, proximity, that everything that we need has to be within walking distance: the school, the library, the park, the restaurant, the grocery stores, all our basic needs. And for that, Carlos also mentioned the golden rule of the 15-minute city, that every single square meter that we have built in the past should be used for multiple activities. As an example, the schools. We have schools in every single neighborhood, everywhere. But usually those schools are open in the morning and close late afternoon and are used only for the children. What if the schools became community hubs, the heart of the neighborhood, and we created neighborhood cities? And in that school, in the evenings can be used for the community, and Saturdays and Sundays and over the holidays. That's kind of the idea. And today we are in for a magnificent presentation. Jeff Speck, who is the author of the Walkable City. I recommend people, if you're going to buy one book about cities and you are in public health or economics or engineering, or you like making food or anything else, elected officials, get the Walking City. And that was written 10 years ago by Jeff. And a few weeks ago, he came out with the 10th anniversary version that has 100 more pages and has an introduction by Janette Sadik-Khan, who's a good friend of Jeff and mine. She was the former commissioner of transportation in New York and now is leading projects at Bloomberg with Bloomberg Associates. So keep in mind that book, give it as a present to your elected officials, to others. Jeff, thank you very, very much for having accepted the invitation to share some of your ideas on the Walkable City, including new updates related to car sharing, to Uber, to Lyft, to the different apps, the driverless cars, sprawl, and everybody is very eager to hear from you. Thank you. And I want to clarify, because some people ask, what is the relation of 880 and Cities for Everyone? Well, I'm the founder of both. And 880 Cities was about 17 years ago, and Cities for Everyone has been developed mostly over the last year. And under the umbrella of Cities for Everyone, basically, we do this webinar that is free, always, everybody who works on it, and every guest also is It's everybody all our guests, they donate their time, their effort. It's magnificent. Also, on their Cities for Everyone, I work with cities for older adults, how to create cities that are good. It's 1/3 of our life, and it's the fastest growing segment everywhere. And the new service is master classes. And the master class, basically, it's brand new. It's online or in person, 6 sessions. If it's online, over 2.5 weeks. If it's in person, it's 2 half days, small groups. And we are going to start on February 16th. And the first registration opens on the 31st. I'll send a very short email to everyone here. The name is Creating Cities for Everyone, affordable, equitable, sustainable. So if you want information, Paula O at gpenalosa. Jeff, I want to thank you very much for having accepted the invitation. We got 500 people connected from 34 different countries in the world. But here they are connected not to hear me, they're connected to hear you. So please tell us a little bit about who you are and go ahead sharing your presentation. By the way, Jeff was gonna talk with our presentation. He did one, and I'm so grateful because we are all giving back on this. And so thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you, Gil. I think the number of people is a testimony. This is the most people I've ever had on a webinar, so clearly it's not just me. I've done other webinars with many fewer people, but you weren't involved. So, and it was really fun hearing you riff on the cities of all the people who joined. It's clear that that you know a little bit about just about everywhere. I say the same thing as a planner. It's my job to know a little bit about everything. But whenever people ask me a detailed question, I say, no, I only know a little bit. So I'm sorry, I don't know more. I should introduce our guest host. This is Queso. He's going to be with us today. He may have some things to say a little bit later. But I do have to take him off my lap so I can operate my computer. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to share. You like the name of my show?
Oh, thank you.
So, as Gil said, and thank you so much for what you do and your voluntary efforts. I did this because you asked. I'm thrilled to have such a big audience from all over the world. That's fantastic. It is now 11 my time. I will try to stop when does this end at my noon?
Yes.
All right, I'll try to stop.
We want to have the last 15 minutes for people to ask questions.
So I'll try to stop. I'll try to be done by
don't make comments on the chat until Jeff stops. But if you have any questions during the presentation, please write them on the Q&A, and Jeff will try to deal with as many as possible.
And if you're sending, I see hearts and other positive messages floating across my screen. That might distract me a little during my talk. We'll see. So Gil mentioned the book Walkable City, now out in a 10th anniversary edition. And I would have done this show for Gil in any case, but now is the time. The book's only been out for a few weeks now. So now is the time. I'm really hoping people will read this book. It has a ton of new stuff in it. There's so much that happened in the past 10 years that I felt I needed to talk about. So I did add 100 new pages. If you've read it before, I think you'll find enough in there. I always tell people, give your old book away to someone else, and this will be your new book. I'm pleased with how popular it's been in the US. I wanted to share this quote because many of you are not from the US. And actually, I've been surprised, the book and my other books have been translated into a lot of different languages. When I write, I'm really writing about America. And I'm always pleased that people find that there's a lot that they can learn from America, but also that people seem to have the ability to know what to take from the books and what not to take from the books. If you were to be in the Netherlands and to follow my advice on bicycles, you'd be stepping down, you'd be doing worse. Because we're doing, here we're really doing remedial work compared to what is being done in many other countries. But I do think that since so many countries, particularly developing countries, tend to uncritically emulate the United States, for better or for worse, there is a lot in there that can be useful in other places. I'm not giving you guys the standard talk. There's a couple standard talks I have that if you find this interesting, if you want this talk's kind of like, it's not the 101 or the 202, it's more like the 950. If you want to know kind of the fundamentals of the stuff that I talk about, I have two different talks at TED. One is about why cities should be more walkable, and the other one is about how to do it. The first one is really these arguments, the economic, the environmental, the epidemiological arguments for why it's so important to make our cities walkable. And I find these arguments are very helpful for folks who are trying to do this work to convince others to believe in it. I should say I recognized subsequent to 10 years ago that I should have included the equity arguments for walkability, which are many and powerful, and you will find those in the new edition of the book as well. And then the other talk, which you'll get a little bit of a taste of today, and it still will frame some of what I discussed today, which is basically projects. But the other talk in how to make cities walkable, I go through what I call my general theory of walkability. It's something that many of us have developed over many years, and it was more of an evolution than an invention. But the general theory of walkability essentially asks, how do you get people to walk, particularly in a country like the US, where driving is so easy and so cheap, and we don't pay the full cost by a long shot? How do you create the conditions in which people will walk or bike rather than drive? And of course, that means the walk or bike has to be as good as the drive. And you accomplish that by doing four things simultaneously. The walk needs to be useful, it needs to be safe, it needs to be comfortable, and it needs to be interesting. And that's a structure that's really held up over the last 10 years. And, based on many years before that of thinking about it, me and others. The reason to walk is really about mixed use, having multiple uses, or as close to every use as you can, close at hand. The safe walk I'll be talking a bit about today, but it used to be about crime. It really isn't in most places about crime anymore. It's about protecting humans from vehicles moving quickly. And that is where I spend a lot of my time, because that is what we tend to get so wrong in the US, just about everywhere. The comfortable walk is about shaping spaces. It's about creating outdoor living rooms. It's about spatial containment. And I'll talk a little bit more about that today. And then finally, the interesting walk is, nothing's more boring than a surface parking lot, than a structured parking lot, than a big building that repeats, than buildings that repeat over and over again, that we need to be interested as we walk, or we will, many people who have the choice will choose not to. So that's the structure. So I want to show you first a project that kind of epitomizes the safe walk work that I do. This is Oklahoma City. This is what it looked like before we got involved. They were named by Prevention Magazine in their Great Walking Cities issue the worst city for pedestrians in the entire country. And the mayor understood that as a problem, and he called me up and said, what do we do? And I said, let's do a walkability study. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, I don't know, but we'll figure it out together. We looked at the downtown grid and we counted the cars in the grid, and knowing that a 2-lane road can handle 10,000 cars per day, we noticed that many of these roads that were 4 lanes, 5 lanes, 6 lanes were holding less than 10,000 cars per day. And we identified in the plan, and the most recent plan said that they would remain as 4 to 6 lane roads. And we said that makes no sense to have a 2 lanes of traffic in a 5 or 6 lane road. Fortunately, right after we did the study, they were building this tower in the heart of downtown that generated $200 million in tax increment. And they decided with my advocacy to rebuild every street in the downtown core. I was in charge of basically the curbs to curbs in that project. And so typical streets, and bear in mind, this was about 15 years ago. So, we would do much better now, but typical streets went to, from 4 lanes to 2. This street went from 3 lanes to 2, and we reverted a lot of 1-ways back to 2-way. 4 lanes to 2 plus a streetcar. You can see the streetcar track in there. This street became this street. Notice this is before we knew to protect the bike lane. So that's what we call a door zone bike lane. But they had no bike lanes before we did the plan. But we always tell people, this is what you do if you have money. They had money to spend, so they rebuilt everything. Most places I work, I tell them, don't rebuild, restripe. This, again, we saw a mismatch between volume of cars and number of lanes. So we took the number of lanes and turned it from this into this. You can see the difference. Which allowed us to take the parking where red is angled and turn it from this to this. So a lot more parking for the merchants, which they appreciated. And we're not at the point yet in these cities where we're trying to reduce parking, although we do that in other places, not in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The bike system went from this to this. So here's a typical street before and after. And this was done just with paint and zero budget. As the streets came up for repair, they repaired them according to the plan, really over 8 years. This fellow here is learning how to park in a protected bike lane, but they eventually figured it out. So that's the sort of work that I do with my colleagues. When people ask us to make their downtowns more walkable, it typically means to make them more safe. I wanted to show one very quick project that illustrates a piece of a project that illustrates the idea of the comfortable walk and the idea of the outdoor living room. And that unless a space has walls, unless it has edges, it really isn't a place. And a place is what attracts people, whether it's traditional or modern. That shaping of space is so important. And we've been talking about this as new urbanists. You know, my mentor, Andre Stwani, and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk, DPZ in Miami, we've been talking about this for many years. What's the right ratio of height to width? Beyond a certain ratio of width to height, you know, when it gets too wide for the height, you don't feel enclosed anymore. You're not comfortable, and the space isn't successful. So I wanted to show you how urban design is typically done in Canada. I believe this is in Canada. You know, new town center. An RE tells me it's either Canada or England. You know, this isn't a town center because it's not a place. It's not a place because it's not a space, and it's not a space because it doesn't have edges. This is a project that I led in a town in Indiana called Elkhart, where we expanded the downtown into this kind of industrial zone. The biggest part of the project was lining streets with buildings and you know, hiding the parking, but shaping the streets with building edges. And I want to show you this part of the plan because we inherited a plan that they were moving forward with, where this street was angling up. This was a new supermarket. This was its parking. These were the greens that they were generously providing to the community. And then these were 5 new apartment houses that you can see. You won't really have a street address. So your address was probably, you know, building A, building B, building C, you know, the suburban standard being inflicted upon an American city, as still happens just about everywhere all the time, unless some rare new urbanist steps up and says, well, this is wrong. And what you need to do instead is this. And what we did was we angled the street to connect it with the street across the way. We created a green that's a real square. We reshaped the buildings into street lining edges to shape this space, to hide the parking. I fought and fought and fought to bring this building down, 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 down. They kept pushing it back and I kept pushing it over in order to enclose that green. This is the view now looking down the green. The square is now built. The trees are brand new in this picture. They still need to grow. The building still needs to land here. But you can see how it really makes a difference to have street edges versus parking. And of course, the building has addresses on the street and isn't floating in a parking lot. So this is both an illustration on how to shape space, but also an illustration on how bad planning is unless you know what you're doing. And unfortunately, not too many people do. Finally, I wanted to show a project that illustrates all of these things, but I think it's most useful in the concept of the useful walk, the reason to walk, because so much of our planet and so much of America, certainly in North America, are areas like this: single-use sprawl, offices, Class A offices, fully rented, fully leased. This is in Carmel, Indiana, sitting, in parking lots. It's a one-use district. Now, there also happens to be some struggling retail right here. So I guess there's 2 uses. Most people wouldn't very happily walk from their office parking to the retail because of the way the landscape is organized as auto-dependent. It's in Carmel, Indiana, where I did this project. And I did this project with Gail, who came in after me, and then the local landscape firm of REA detailed it out. But the Carmel, Indiana is a fascinating place. They've got 147 roundabouts. I'm not a huge roundabout fan, but I understand they have their place. And the mayor is a real progressive planning type. Jim Brainerd is really a brilliant guy. And this was a plan from 2012 where they had this, this trail. To zoom in a little bit, you have a main street right here at the north that was quite successful, a traditional main street. You have a civic center to the south with a performing arts center and a new hotel, and further down you had the city hall, and you had a half mile in between them. And aside from people using this trail, which connects all the way to Indianapolis for recreation, no one was ever walking between the kind of civic heart of the downtown and the commercial heart of the downtown. I mean, no one would ever think to do that. And the mayor had received several other plans that he had rejected over the years for developing this industrial part of the city, or kind of post-industrial, kind of left over with a shopping plaza kind of failing here, and then a whole bunch of just wasted space, defunct industrial uses in between. And my proposal was to actually, it shocked a lot of people. People resisted at first, was to bring in a street. Right? This is supposed to be a trail. It's supposed to be a nature trail and a bicycle and pedestrian trail. But my conclusion that I think was right is that it would never be a place until it had good edges, until it had mixed use, and until it had actually fronts. And in suburban Indiana, if you don't have a street, you don't have a front. And so the idea was to create a boulevard that isolated the rail trail in the middle and had a lane of traffic south, a lane of traffic north, and other things in it. Here's one of the renderings from my plan from 2012. And I finally got to go back this past year working on this other site that I'm going to show you, and got to see the reality that the rendering had become the reality. And by putting a narrow, delicate street that, yes, welcomes vehicles along it, surrounding the center of this boulevard, putting green spaces along it, which was in our plan, that it really has become the heart of this community. And just walking around on a Sunday, it was full of people enjoying the facility, people walking in the bike lanes, people biking in the walking lanes. It was a complete mess, but it was safe for everyone, and really worked. So I was called back just this past summer to look at this site, and the mayor was not the client. The mayor convinced a local developer, not a local developer, the international developer who owns many dozens of office buildings like this one, to bring me in. Excuse me, I'm gonna have a sip of coffee. And to do a suburban retrofit. And you may be aware of this book by Ellen Dunham Jones, that is, and June Williamson. There's Retrofitting Suburbia. There's this second book called Case Studies in Retrofitting Suburbia. They're really fantastic books. There were very few projects in them that were similar in scope and detail to what we were taking on, but there was one that was quite similar, and it was done at DPZ when I was at DPZ, although I didn't work on it. And it was a headquarters in Plano, Texas, and all that really existed was office buildings like these 1, 2, 3, and a ton of parks and parking. It was a kind of a defunct office park, Ross Perot's old EDS headquarters. And DPZ came in and did this plan, which made a full neighborhood out of it. And, the quality of life change between having an office in a place like this and having an office on a street like this, and this is the after, is what motivates the owners of the office building, understanding that they want to, over the years, be able to command as much rent as they can. Switching the tenant experience from this to this is really worth working with other developers, housing developers, hotel developers, to bring life to the edges of the street. So now you have a street address. You're not building C, but you're 14 Legacy Way, and you're across the street from dining and everything else. So the site kind of implied a street network And I won't take you through all of the details of the plan, except to say that we found the hidden street network. So we looked at the hedgerows and the building edges, places where streets could go and should go along the edges of the building, along the hedgerows. This retail is largely defunct, and we were liberated to replan this area as well. We looked at the curving suburban swoopy streets, which immediately tells someone it's a driving environment and not a walking environment. Realize, for example, this street could just become this street, and this entire street could be eliminated. And that led to this plan. So you can see how streets have been laid in against the edges of the buildings, against the hedgerows. You can see how parking has been structured. Takes up much less space than it did before. And then we're adding almost everything you see in red is housing, but there's a retail heart, which sits in this area in the center where all the downstairs are retail. You can see there's lots of wonderful civic spaces scattered throughout the development. There's a recreational center with pickleball, which if you're not American, you may not know about. But pickleball is the new miniature tennis that we're playing over here. You can see that there's a lot of parking hiding the highway to the north with the parking structures, and then hiding the parking structures behind row houses and behind apartments. You can understand the structure. This is the view, and in the upper part of the screen, you can see where these perspectives are shot. So this is the view of one of the mayor's roundabouts that'll be in our at our entry. This roundabout to the south was already being built. This was a new roundabout that we're introducing. You can see that there's a full, maybe you can't see, but there's a full separated sidewalk level European style bike facility going into the sidewalk. This little roundabout marks the entrance to the retail corridor, which heads to the triangular green that you see here, pathway through the building to a courtyard, and the access to the parking that is in this big block, mostly for visitors in the center. Squeezing pedestrian and leisure spaces between the existing office buildings and the new row houses that are hiding the parking. Here's the apartments beyond. This is a pedestrian street that we've introduced between two buildings in the plan that terminates on the access point to this green, which is an amphitheater you see here. So the walking street comes through here, terminates on this building. A natural drop against the lake caused it to make sense as an amphitheater with a stage in the water as a dock. Here you see the pickleball courts and the level of development that we're bringing to this area. And I wanted to be sure to show you guys this plan, or actually these 2 pages, because when you do a plan, you can make what we call an illustration plan that shows an ideal build out of the site. And this is what we've determined is the way we would develop it if we were developers. But of course, what really matters is the space between the buildings and where the retail is and the shaping of the spaces and that the edges are friendly. And so, there's a lot of different outcomes that could happen. And what matters is those aspects, as the CNU charter says, we work to optimize those aspects of the private realm that influence the quality of the public realm. And so a regulating plan, for example, with demise lines that breaks this building into 3, so it doesn't look like one huge building, that's what these lines do, and with required retail locations and with optional retail locations, with places where the frontage needs to be higher quality and places where the frontage doesn't need to be high quality. Of course, with the placement of every street tree, every curb, every parking space, and then naming and detailing out each of these civic spaces, that's what really matters. So when we complete a plan, we do both the illustration plan, but then we make sure to really, make law, make adopted into the city planning ordinance, something like this, which replaces the existing zoning on the site and requires the edges and the building locations and building heights and tree locations that really matter. So that's that project. And I just wanted to end with some of the diagrams showing how we, introduce small blocks, which are essential to walkability. The figure ground, of course, becomes much more complete than it was before. All this with surface parking on the ground is being replaced by structured parking in very limited places. That's all hidden. Here's the old figure ground and the new figure ground. the tree stands that shape the plan, then of course the civic spaces that come out of the presence of trees and other features on the site. So that's I think a really exciting project. The owner of all of this office space is not a housing developer. So actually we're reaching out to the housing development community. And actually, if any of you are housing developers and interested in partnering, there have already been inquiries from about 30 different developers, which is great. But I would love it if it ends up going to someone that is a friend of ours. So, or at least an urbanist. So that's the plan. And just one of the many kind of interesting projects that we see happening these days. I wanted to share a few resources with you before I get to my reading. I'm going to do a little reading that Gil asked me to do from the new material. I have a website that's just jeffspeck.com. On that website, you will find all the talks, a bunch of longer talks. You'll find a ton of projects, and of course, access to all the different books. So please, if you remember one thing and you want to learn more, go there. I mentioned the 2 TED Talks that are at TED.com. And then, of course, the books. I wanted to stress that that Walkable City is the book really for novices and for more experienced people to be inspired by. There is stuff to learn from in it, but it's the best tool for getting other people excited, getting regular folks interested in these issues. And that's the reason I say that is that I would direct you actually to this book. This is my book from 2018. It's called Walkable City Rules, and actually it's much more technical. It's much more detailed. It has a lot more pictures and diagrams, and a typical page of the 101 rules is one like this, replace signals with always stops. And here's our plan for Albuquerque where we did that. When you replace signals with always stops, the number of severe injury accidents drops by 62%. So the book is full of things like that, rule by rule. I would direct you there first, but of course the website is the source for everything. And that's my talk. But I want to I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see me. And Gil actually received a copy of my book, and he read all the new stuff. And he said, to my surprise, he said, Jeff, I want you to read the little chapter that's the letter to urban planners. Even though it's for America, it certainly makes sense in anywhere in North America, but also he thought that folks from other places would find it instructive and at least interesting. Now, I am a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners. I'm proud of being a certified planner and having a license, but it has struck me that the role that planners have played in the evolution of planning in the US has been not exactly helpful. So I will explain myself fully in this reading that hopefully won't offend any planners, or it will offend the right planners. This book begins with the statement that Jane Jacobs, who wrote in 1960, won over the planners by 1980. This is largely true as it relates to strategies for the inner city, but on reflection is less accurate when it comes to how our cities and rural areas have been allowed to grow. By 1980, urban renewal was discredited and nobody smart was advocating for more inner city highways, but the juggernaut of sprawl was only gaining momentum. Anyone who has traveled America over the past 40 years can bear witness to how our cities continue to decant outward into the countryside, as even the most rural crossroads manage to attract a soulless detritus of speedways and Dollar Generals. Sadly, this growth, destructive as it is to local economy, culture, and nature, was often guided by professional planners who administer the zoning codes and development standards that give it shape. Fighting urban, suburban, and rural sprawl, which many of us have identified as the biggest physical mistake that America has ever made, is where I began my design career, turning only later to the problems and promise of older towns and cities. We designed new towns like Seaside, Florida, and Kentlands, Maryland, hoping that these traditionally organized neighborhoods, based on walking rather than driving, would become beloved and therefore replace the single-use sprawl paradigm that everyone seemed to hate. Only the former occurred. That was the beloved part. Every new neighborhood we built, unless expressly directed at low-income populations, quickly escalated into the luxury market as buyers voted with their feet. Developers took notice. There are now hundreds of new urban communities around the United States, but each one is not an anomaly, and the car-dependent development pattern continues unabated. It seems to me we've tried everything, but the we is still narrowly defined, and the fight for more walkable communities actually, unbelievably, lacks the full-throated support of the planning profession. The APA, the American Planning Association, the organization that has dictated the conduct of professional planners since mid-century, has never taken a bold stance on sprawl. It has a sustainability division, not to mention a new urbanism division, just as it has a Latino division and an LGBTQ division, as if socially responsible planning is some sort of demographic rather than the very reason for planners to organize in the first place. It oversees planner certification and ethical standards with a heavy hand, but has little to say about the shape of our communities. I can't suggest with any confidence that transforming the planning profession from rubber stamping enablers into anti-sprawl warriors will be enough to reverse 75 years of poor decisions, but it seems worth a shot. As a fellow of the organization, at least until they read this, I would like here to launch a campaign to make this change. Jumping well ahead to its conclusion, I have proposed a first draft of the open letter that a properly reformed APA would issue to its membership and the media. It contains, in addition to a long overdue mea culpa, something I am calling the Planner's Pledge, a commitment each planner would make to plan well and not badly. It's a first draft, but I welcome the APA to run with it. And here it is. An open letter to all professional planners and the general public from the American Planning Association. As an establishment organization that has pushed for what it believed to be best practices while inevitably advancing the dominant ideology of its society, the American Planning Association wishes to formally apologize for the significant role that it has played in creating the unsustainable suburban sprawl development pattern that now constitutes most of the American built environment, reinforcing race and class segregation while burdening the vast majority of citizens with the mandate of car ownership. To put it bluntly, we have participated and continue to participate in the creation of a landscape that separates us ruthlessly, both from different activities and from different people, such that we are inordinately dependent on our automobiles and less connected to one another. While citizens of other nations enjoy daily life in walkable, mixed-use, diverse neighborhoods, the typical American lives in a cluster of economically identical single-family houses where it is impossible to safely walk to work, school, shopping, recreation, or worship. The outcomes of this pattern of growth could not be more profound. We've gained weight, lost economic resilience, exacerbated inequity, and undermined the social fabric as our daily driving cooks the planet. This changes today. Professional planners who sit in city and town halls across the nation and create the rules that shape our growth, in being directly responsible for the current circumstances, must take responsibility for changing them. Apologies are not enough. We must step forward with a new model of professional conduct designed to undo nearly a century of misdirection. It will take many years to reverse the zoning laws and transportation standards that created and reinforce our car-dependent landscape. Politics will continue to favor business as usual. The home building and road building industries will keep pushing for more of the same and will keep funding politicians who do their bidding. But municipal planners, as a profession, can take a stand. In some places, we will be effective in changing the rules. It is already happening in Minneapolis, Seattle, and elsewhere, and every place makes a difference. This effort is enforceable. Planners are professionally certified within the APA by the AICP, American Institute of Certified Planners. Not every planner is certified, especially younger ones, but AICP certification is considered the hallmark of full professional status. Maintaining this status, which requires continuing education and adherence to a strictly enforced code of ethics, is something planners take seriously. The AICP certification is the tool that the planning profession can use to hold its members to a higher standard, one that acknowledges that it is neither professional nor ethical to build a landscape that actively damages our health, our social fabric, and our environment. As of today, the American Planning Association will make AICP certification dependent on signing the Planner's Pledge below. Those who object are welcome to create their own alternative certifying body, perhaps the AICSP, the American Institute of Certified Sprawl Planners. Towns and cities, for their part, are welcome to continue to plan badly, defying everything we know about what makes for sustainable places, but they will do so without the blessing of a profession that is finally acting on decades of evidence that planning around the automobile makes America worse. Some may say that the American Planning Association is a lumbering institution, more concerned with its own preservation than with its impact on society. Most young planners question the value of AICP certification. With this act, we hope to reinvigorate the AICP imprimatur by giving it meaning. Planners who wish to earn or maintain AICP certification beyond 2023 will be planners who can be trusted to implement current best practices, which means throwing off many years of destructive convention. Just as doctors who prescribe leeches are no longer likely to maintain their licenses, planners who create or abet car-dependent sprawl will henceforth be relegated to ply their trade in the proverbial back alley beyond the bounds of respected practice. The Planner's Pledge is as follows. Whereas car-dependent development is destructive to our health, our economy, our environment, and our social fabric. Planning around the car is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Traffic studies and parking minimums perpetuate and worsen the very car dependence that they hope to mitigate. Land use zoning, beyond its original purpose of separating housing from noxious uses, creates car dependence. Most negative impacts of car-based planning will not be alleviated by electrification, especially the wasteful consumptive patterns caused by decentralization. Single-family zoning, invented to perpetuate racial segregation in the face of civil rights laws, is morally bankrupt and destructive to overcoming past injustices. Income diversity within neighborhoods is a social good that developers will typically not allow for unless required to do so by local ordinance. Affordable housing is not truly affordable if its residents cannot lead productive lives car-free. Walkable, bikeable communities provide their inhabitants with a superior quality of life and must be acknowledged as an unmitigated good. Achieving walkability depends on the creation of a physical framework in which walking is truly useful, safe, comfortable, and interesting. The majority of the American built environment is car dependent. These places should be allowed to grow, but only in ways that lessen their dependency. Homelessness is a condition that cities can address most affordably by first providing housing and only subsequently placing any demands upon the person housed. Primary schooling is best provided in neighborhoods in which it can be reached on foot. The same is true of daycare, playgrounds, parks, pools, and other municipal amenities. I pledge that I will encourage more housing in walkable areas, encourage the construction of schools that most students can reach on foot or bike, encourage the construction of small local parks and other amenities, mandate inclusionary zoning, allow accessory dwelling units everywhere, support housing first policymaking, work to eliminate all on-site parking requirements, require all apartment properties to decouple parking fees from rents, require all large employers to offer transit passes, bike subsidies, or simple cash payouts to employees who do not drive of equal value to a parking space, work to locate dense development along frequent transit routes and vice versa, encourage the implementation of docked bike share programs, insist that all new streets and roads offer low-stress micro-mobility routes, either through protected lanes or mixing with truly low-speed traffic, encourage congestion pricing for crowded roadways, encourage the adoption of Vision Zero policies, engineer new roads with a design speed no higher than the desired driver speed, advocate for firefighting equipment that fits streets and not vice versa, replace traffic signals with always stop signs wherever feasible, work towards a goal of continuous tree canopy above all thoroughfares and parking lots, and advocate against bike helmet laws as they suppress ridership and worsen safety. Almost done. I pledge that I will not encourage or assist in the consolidation of schools or parks into larger facilities, encourage or assist in the proliferation of ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft in places with significant transit ridership, encourage or assist in the development of any autonomous driving technology or any technology that limits the freedom of pedestrians and cyclists, build or abet the building of any new highways or highway lanes, allow traffic studies to limit new development or mandate wider streets, build or abet the building of any new thoroughfare that does not safely welcome pedestrians and cyclists, locate any parking lots between a right-of-way edge and a front door, locate any parking structures facing a sidewalk without another use at ground level, encourage the destruction of any substantial sidewalk-facing building facade more than 100 years old. In signing this pledge, I understand that it is equally binding as the AICP Code of Ethics and that any violation thereof is grounds for revocation of my professional certification. Thank you for your consideration as you embark upon this profound change in our way of serving the public. To professional planners, we ask for your understanding and compliance. To everyone else, we ask for your forgiveness. The American Planning Association and the American Institute of Certified Planners had nothing to do with this text. It is fiction, a mere proposal. But wouldn't it be nice? So that's that.
Thank you very much, Jeff. This has been great. You provided so many examples from the downtown, from the suburbs, small cities, large cities, rich ones, poor ones, on why walkable city is so critical, but also why it is doable. It is doable because in the last 10 years, more and more and more mayors and councils and decision makers are talking about the walkable city, but very few are actually doing it. And it's urgent because of climate change, because of mental and physical health, because of economic development. We really gotta start implementing many of these actions. So I wanna thank you. And also I wanna invite people, if they wanna see again this presentation or any session, they can go to gpenalosa.ca, go to the logo on the webinar, click, and you can see any of the presentations. And also you can share it with others. And I'll see you 2 weeks from now in another session. Remember, it's always free and hopefully always interesting. Thank you.